Are we live? Are we live?
We are
Season
live.
2, Episode 4. Wake up and deliver. As always, this is Matt and John bringing everything that is fantastic to logistics to you. You like that one, John?
I do. Very good. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start off like we always do with some, I don't know what you want to call it, some coffee. Coffee knowledge,
What do you even
coffee
call it?
knowledge.
You've been calling it brain food for like
Yeah,
two
I
seasons
know.
now. You got a name.
I'm trying to change it up here. I'm trying to make it seem a bit better. Um, into my new element of bringing it to the screen. Let me start off with, if you want to get paid, find the contrast. No one hears you if you sneeze in the middle of New York, but if you sneeze in the library, everybody does. The same concept applies to work. It's better to dominate a small pond than drown in the ocean. I need the face reaction on this one.
Yeah. That's a good one too. Look at you, 2 for 2 now. Like the last 2 weeks, both been bangers since you've gone to the displaying of the quote. No, I think that's true, man. I think that especially in logistics, right? People regularly chase big logos. They want to be involved with the big players, and I mean, look, there's reasons for that. But to your point, like if you're with a corporation doing billions in revenue, what's the likelihood that you're going to become like that key part of the infrastructure slash the backbone, realistically, right?
Yeah. Right. Like we always talk about, find your niche and be perfect at it. Don't take that general route like everybody else, because it's going to be hard to differentiate yourself. Be a little bit different. Be a little bit different.
Be a little bit different for sure. So funny thing, I'll drop this on you. I've actually been spending time working with people now on the sales offers. You know how much I like bitch about this all the time, about how people just sell kind of all the same way. So I've been helping more people with it, and it's so interesting, especially because of all the work that we do, with the show, with content in general, with sharing messages and ideas, just how when you just like read those things, like you're not going into a customer with this, like you shouldn't want to, you know what I mean, like we need to tweak that, tweak this, whatever. And that's not, it's not really saying that it's bad, but it's really, when you come from that outside perspective and you just like you come at it just and you evaluate it on the merit, it's wild how different that overall perception of something is, right? Like how strong that value offer is, or how unique does it really sound? Because I'm sure you see it all the time, right? You're doing a lot of your own solutions and stuff like that. Like it's easy to kind of know how hard it is to string a bunch of things together, even if they seem kind of like I don't want to say basic, but I mean, if it just seems kind of like exactly what the customer asked for, it's not always easy to do. So you want to sell on, hey, I did a lot of quality, I'm very reliable, I have great partners, da da da. But everybody is going to say that.
Yeah, well, it's even difficult sometimes to have the customer understand certain things past their own SOPs and compliance, when you can do something different. Like, oh, that's outside of what we allow. And you're like, well, why? It can save you money. But like, this is not within the box that we were given. And that sometimes is just as challenging, talking to the likes of John, that are not as as innovative as John is out there when you're doing the sales. And I think that's a lot of the challenge too, that a lot of people have, is when you do have a great product, you don't know how to conceptualize it in a way that will fit into that organization that you're working with. And what I mean by fit is have that concise conversation and talk to the right people. And I know we keep saying, we've said this before, but it's the same thing. Like when you talk to your immediate person that you talk to at an organization, and you explain that fact and it's a great idea, and then they sell it to their supervisor or their manager, and they'll sell it to their director, their VP, and their VP will that idea gets convoluted all the way through. That's why having a very concise, a very precise way of displaying that information, that you can share it, that it can be self-explanatory, where someone doesn't have to dive deeper, does go a long way.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you got to remember too that, as any kind of solution like moves through the levels, people are going to inherently like drop the things that they're less confident about, or that they themselves can't see the solution per se, or
Mm.
you can't see how it all connects, which means that, like, the quality of that overall message or the impact of the innovation or the change or whatever most likely is getting like dumbed down and minimized every time different people have to kind of run with the ownership or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. On that topic, though, John, I
Oh,
know you love this topic. I'm sure I'm going to get you reacted to this.
oh yeah, okay.
It's like lithium batteries in water reactions.
Or air. Oh yeah, I jumped on these guys on Saturday.
Ottawa lending $1 billion to Canada Post.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, so there's two parts to this. One, there's obviously the $1 billion. The only thing that is um a touch more interesting is that they also let go of three senior executives.
Yeah.
Um, Only one of them I actually think kind of mattered, in my opinion. I know it's going to sound
Wow.
bad. It's going to sound bad. Only in the sense that two of the three I would say were probably more employee related, communication related roles, right? And I think that there's a lot of fallout, obviously, from the strike, how long it lasted, maybe some internal, like, let's call it misunderstandings that led to the impact of the strike. And then one was their senior VP of I don't know, let's transformation slash optimization or whatever. So that role, I'm not even trying to be harsh with the person, but I mean, like, I honestly don't know what they did. Like, they're not, I haven't seen anything radically change or whatever. I'm sure they did, because I know some people at Canada Post. I know they spent a lot of time doing like network optimization, route optimizations, and stuff, which is actually kind of funny because there's another last mile provider in the US right now that's making a lot of noise based on ounce based pricing. And they put out a video on Saturday or Sunday as well, talking about how they can do ounce based pricing and how they can do last mile delivery for even cheaper. Right. And they basically hung their
Really?
hat. Oh, yeah. Then USPS. And they hung their hat on technology. Oh, well, we have better technology, and that's why. So honestly, like, that's straight shit. Oh, sorry, I probably shouldn't say that. But like,
But
it's actually it's nonsense. Anyone that believes that knows nothing about.
how does straight technology help reduce it? Because you need that infrastructure to help
Well,
reduce it, right?
but this is what I mean, and I only bring that up because we're talking about Canada Post, and I legitimately know people at Canada Post that work in these optimization things, and their modeling, like when it comes to planning routes and stuff like that, is absurd. They actually track the number of steps from, if it's a street delivery versus like a community box delivery. They track the number of steps from a stop. If it's, door to door mail drops, they actually know the amount of steps with the average walking speed and all kind. Like, trust me, Canada Post and USPS are not struggling because they don't know how to do math. And anyone that believes that is straight up lying to themselves. So that's why I'm saying I'm not sure what this particular senior VP was really focused on. I know they were doing like network optimization studies and stuff like that, but those types of things are where you make improvements. They don't dramatically save your business. Like, you're not going to take the same model, tighten it up, and then all of a sudden be radically different. You know what I mean? It's like someone, you know, who's obviously just losing weight or whatever and switching up their diet and doing different strategies. Well, you're not all of a sudden going to get jacked just by eating less. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there has to be different inputs, and you have to fundamentally do things differently if you want these different results. Like, you're not going to eat your way to that stage, showman body. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I wonder to that point how much active sales any postal service does.
Yeah, I think they're probably pretty lazy on the sales side. I do know from, working with different people last year that, both USPS and Canada Post were fairly active. But again, their biggest value proposition was always still on price for the most part, right? And network coverage. But the reality is, like, of course you can hit all of the zips or you can hit all of the postal codes. Like, one, you're mandated to do it, but like, okay, yeah, you do have the infrastructure to do it. But the reality is, the population base that's sitting in, rural or remote Canada or rural or remote US
and
isn't
that's
what's
that's that.
changing the needle for these organizations. You know what I mean?
It's the metropolitan city centers of downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver, downtown Montreal, and the condominiums and all this other piece where your competitive edge is not as strong as delivering to Nunavut or delivering to North Dakota, middle of nowhere, or
Yeah.
the Yellowstone Ranch.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? And in my opinion, both USPS and Canada Post don't play enough on their actual infrastructure advantages. And realistically, they need to shift. Like they need to be able to dedicate more of that infrastructure to packages and e-commerce, like sort of commerce in general, rather than just the letter stuff and stuffing mailboxes with useless flyers.
Yeah, I don't know how much they still make off those letters. I know stamps are usually the number one collectible piece that has increased values, but those are like for collections. It's not driving not driving the revenue up. So there has to be. I don't see Canada Post or Postal Service delivering as much as they used to. 10 years ago, it was the area that they were doing. They just kind of stayed with it. They kind of said nobody else will be able to do it as well as we do, I think, and I just sat there. I think active sales, like anything, any organization, they need an active sales team that is robust, competitive, and out there, hitting up businesses and not individuals. And I think that's where kind of the mandate kind of changes, because then are they walking all over, in Canada Post perspective, are they walking all over Purolator's mandate, where they're more of that courier business aspect of it? So is that relationship on the Canadian side, should that be reevaluated between Canada Post and Purolator? And should Purolator be a standalone non-Crown corporation, owned by a Crown corporation, and set up that way? And Canada Post starts delving into that piece.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, Purolator has been making some money, right? They're pretty fine margin, but I mean, a lot of logistics people are. Um, I think overall, they need to fundamentally. I know it's gonna sound bad, but they have until they like very intentionally deprioritize mail, and that's hard for them because the system is built for mail, and actually per piece mail, even with stamps, is wildly more profitable per piece than package delivery. But the reality is, like,
There's
no
not as
matter
much
how
of it.
well, there's still lots, but the thing is that it's dying anyway, and a lot of physical mail is actually um, sustained by government programs, whether federal or state or provincial or whatever, because of their stupid insistence of leveraging physical documents and stuff like that, right? Like there's almost nothing that anyone needs these days that actually has to go with a letter. It's become, if anything, more of a novelty than a need. And
Even your grand aunt is sending you an email versus a letter with a card. Now you're getting a gift card across the internet.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I just think that there's so little where it's actually used. So Canada Post, 3 people out, 3 senior executives out. Only one is operational or business technical, in my opinion, and I think it needs to be more. I know that sounds terrible to say, but unfortunately, I don't think it's realistic to say, hey, we've got this group of people that haven't been able to come up with any real significant innovation in X amount of years, but now all of a sudden they're going to be inspired to think dramatically differently. It's unlikely. It's like a sunk cost fallacy of believing that like these people are good enough, and it's not on them per se. I just think that they're either too institutionalized, they just don't know, or they've kind of defeated themselves, feeling defeated by the system or the mandate or whatever, and they just need to change. Like it's funny how immediate we expect that from things like sports teams or whatever. Like, hey, you're underperforming, change it up. Like very aggressive with that. But in our businesses, we seem to think like, oh, eventually the person will come around and learn enough to do it. It's like, why does that seem like a realistic strategy and way to do it?
Well, I mean, in business, it's supposed to just go under, right? If it's not performing, it's not doing what the
Yeah.
people want. It should just. But on that note, not to stay too much on the Canada Post, in line with, because I think we're going to have a theme today, more government-oriented conversation.
Okay.
On that note, a little bit of a twist: labor issues, a little bit of challenges that we're still seeing. I think it's going to be prevalent in 2025. Still, I don't think those labor issues that we saw in 2024 are gone. They might be even a little bit amped up. another
Mm,
rail strike potentially, um, and it's not good for the rail.
no.
Not at all. This is going to cause a lot of challenges. A lot of customers will start looking for other avenues as these potential strikes keep coming up and down. Even if they avoid it, I think headlines like this already damage a lot of perception for the rail.
Yeah, I I agree. And actually, it was funny because you spent more time around the rail than I have. And you brought up last time we talked like that there was an issue with this, talking about how, certain industries are heavily, heavily leveraged into rail, right? But to your point, the more that this stuff comes up, the more they're going to be like, we need to think of something to do it differently. And then on the flip side, where rail has been a great option to offset costs for a host of industries, everything from other business to business type stuff, right, to business to consumer stuff. When you're talking about moving stuff coast to coast because of where it may come in on ports, um, even that is going to get people frustrated because no one can afford to have any type of product locked in the system, and that's the biggest drawback to rail. I mean, air is kind of similar too, but it's obviously a lot faster. But I mean, when you have a product on a in a container and then it's on the line, there's no just grabbing that at the next
Yeah,
stop
there's no
versus
rescuing it. There's
no.
no speeding it up. If there's a backlog, if it gets bumped, it's not delivering until when it delivers, kind of aspect. You're kind of stuck, and that's why a lot of consumer customers are moving over to the road options in these scenarios because that rail has. But I find it very interesting, and I have to dig a little bit further, truthfully. But I don't hear as much issues with rail in Europe, and they have far more on going on rail than we do. And I'm curious why. Is it because there's a lot more different service providers? There's a lot more competition. Do they just have it set up in a different format? Um, it,
I
it
think,
just,
yeah, I don't know. I think that I think Europe, honestly, for a lot of the key markets, they benefit from some pretty wild density. You know what I mean? When you actually think of like market access, when you think of like what's happening over relatively small geographies, like I mean, Europe, it's large, but I mean like, what moves within the UK, what comes out of the UK into, France, and what's going into, countries like Germany and Poland and stuff like that. It's they have a better infrastructure, but I think honestly a lot to do with it has a little bit more to do with the balance of like even how they do business. The EU is pretty stringent on a lot of their regulations. I think that there's a number of European countries, or um, you know yeah, I guess, yeah, okay, European countries probably fair. I was going to say like in the EU, but just European countries in general that they do have a little bit different take when it comes to wages, when it comes to collective agreements. Like France, as an example, is almost on the other side. Like they're a very, very dominant, like, social slash workforce kind of environment, right? Where the people are very quick to push back and stand up for
yeah, I mean,
issues.
it was, economists said the 35-hour work week will destroy the French economy. And it's been a few years and it's still humming. Like it's
Yeah.
still going the way it was, right? And then everybody here in North America is talking about how back to work, back to the office work, it has to happen because that is far more efficient. And you got countries like Dubai, well, the city state like Dubai, going, no, we want more of the population to be working from home because it helps with congestion, it helps with productivity, it helps with efficiency, right? So it's kind of
It's fun.
funny how
It's
that
funny too because Dubai is very forward thinking.
very far and very conservative, right? In,
Yeah.
in in their policies and the way that they want to make sure that they save money on that piece.
Well, but just
I
sorry,
think,
one last thing though on that I think is pretty important though, or at least interesting for people to consider. So, I've been like joking with you about this Costco post that keeps blowing up and doesn't want to go away that I made like last week or whatever. But you know the rail and all of these things are similar, right? You see the dock workers, you see rail, you see things with like big businesses like Amazon and Costco. Whether people agree or not, okay, whether you feel that it's fair or not, but at the wage level, it is very, very evident that there is a growing dissatisfaction within the workforce, And I don't think that it's necessarily just on the heels of like, hey, I don't get paid enough. I think what's really starting to happen, and I think that's an issue that really bumps up with Costco. I think it's when you're seeing these things like at the ports and with the rail, is that I think you're seeing more and more a fear response or a discomfort with where they know things are probably going because of technology and sort of cost containment and operations and running 24/7. So I think it's like a dual thing where there's definitely probably some wage opportunities, but I think it has a lot of fear and people are really trying to say like we want to stay locked in because the biggest tension right now is like if all of these jobs and all of these things kind of go away and there's these big gaps in our economy, like not everybody can do the same thing. And then for our type of consumer and materialistic style culture, it's like, well, who's going to buy the stuff if no one can make money?
That's what I was going to say. That's the famous quote. I think it was Jimmy Hoffa when he was walking through the Ford plant, and the guy, the Ford president, is showing him all the robotics, and he goes, "Hey, Jimmy, what do you think of all these robots?" And he goes, "Look, this is the future of the American workforce." And Jimmy looks around and he goes, "Who's going to buy all the Ford trucks now?"
Yeah.
Because traditionally Ford, paid their people high wages so they can afford their own product, and then be that circle of buying and keeping that production up.
Mm-hmm.
But as less and less people are there, you see the slump, and we talked about it last week in the automotive and the big three American companies because they can. But the one that does, Tesla, pays their employees quite high wages. I think I just saw a posting for $300,000 to work at Tesla as one of their software engineers.
Yeah, but I mean, still in the software space, right? Very different than the people on the line. And I'd be willing to bet you at a person per square foot ratio, probably on the manufacturing floor, I'd be willing to bet they're significantly lower than almost anybody else.
It'll be interesting.
At least compared to the traditional manufacturers.
So moving into the final conversation that we're going to get into, but I think it's a lead-in into that conversation that we're going to lead into is I found this very interesting. I think a lot of companies are getting prepped for tariffs. I think a lot of companies are getting ready for disturbances, and they're buying as much as possible, and then retroactively thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
This is why you see a bump. We saw a bump back in September, October, November, December, and everybody said, "Hey, the freight recession was over," because we've seen increase of demand. I think it was just a prep for a lot of this product that's coming in, and they're going to sit on it as tariffs now take hold and all this product is already in. It's you want to have enough inventory to be able to manage the tariffs and the uncertainty in the marketplace.
Oh, for sure. So
realize.
Yeah, exactly. So I pushed out, this week's newsletter pretty late last night, but it was 100% saying, the tariffs are coming. Here's why. And one of the things that I said in there about supply chain in general was that people are, buying a little bit more early, not just to avoid tariffs, because that's a short-term thing, but realistically, anyone will do it at least, Q1 to mitigate any kind of real unplanned bump before they have time to react. The other thing is, though, as things shift and change, different tariffs, different providers, different costs, whatever it can be, some of it may even just be different expectations when it comes to transactions and paperwork, let's say. It has a very real potential to slow things down. And these days, anyone, you can't just be out of stock all of a sudden for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it could be. So, I think a lot of organizations that can afford it will most certainly bring in, they're going to up their inventory levels at least for the first half of the year, I think, for sure.
Well, even when if let's say next week, which is supposed to be February 1st, so this Saturday, President Trump signs it in, tariffs for Canada and Mexico, it's going to take a little bit of time before that's enacted and going. So you're going to see a surge of people buying as much product as they can that can be shelf stable. The problem is the products that can't when it comes to food and whatnot. You can't buy enough of that. And that's where I think a lot of those tariffs will hurt people the most. Is all of a sudden we had this trouble in Canada, we had this trouble in the United States. Food prices are getting ridiculously high. People spending, I don't know how much you spend, but every
Too
month.
much, man. I actually had some kid at the grocery store being like, I never seen this much. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
it wasn't that bad, my man. At least I didn't think it was. But whatever.
But that's the point, right? Like, you buy. I bought a couple pounds of chicken the other day, and it was like $30. And you're going, Jesus, that's I'm trying to feed a family of five, and it racks up quickly.
Super,
And
super fast. And then the worst is that like they don't even really have one, there's if everyone's doing it, there's no real competition. And then two, the restaurants are just as bad. Like, you know what I mean? You get a couple of pizzas here, or if you go like pizzas are $50, and if you go out to the restaurant and like we're the same sort of five. If you went out to the restaurant, it'd be like easy 150 $200 by the like just for the meal, and that's if like there's nothing super elaborate.
listen, last week kids wanted McDonald's. Five of us all got McDonald's. It was like 70, $80.
Right? And do you not feel you're getting like okay, I probably can't use this word. Violated is probably a better way than to put it. But do you not just feel you're getting violated having to pay that for like what you're really getting out of it? It's like I'm killing my body. The quality, nutritive value is very low. Everyone's gonna probably feel a little sluggish and not great after, and it's like $80. You're like,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole piece, right? Like, when did all these, and this is all obviously connected to everything that is when food prices go up, all the subsequent industries that are connected, restaurants, everything have to raise their prices, and restaurants are already having struggles because the servers are getting pushed back from people going there with the tips and this and that, and then gig workers and delivery. Like, all this is all connected. That's what I'm saying. It's far more challenging, I think, coming into 2025 with what you said, the labor challenges and the tariffs that are going to come in. I think a lot of companies are prepping to get their inventories up and stable, to be able to circumvent it as long as possible, because they're going to see that slump of people not wanting to purchase as much.
Well,
if you are doing direct to customer deliveries, I think it might be a bit of a challenge for 2025. I still think focusing on business to business is the better route for the most part, until obviously you can't be.
Well, and if you think about it too, I think, if you're a smaller retailer or e-commerce brand, especially if you're these DTC brands, this is where I think a lot of stuff is going to get super messy, because the thing is that, to your point, as all of these things go up, right? Like as all of these different costs go up on the basics, on just pure necessity. People have to eat, people have to have, fuel, gas, whatever, most likely for the most part. Like, as all of these things continue to put pressure, the money to offset those increases comes from like the more disposable side of the spectrum, or the more like want-based side of the spectrum. So if I'm a big retailer, billion-dollar retailer, if I have my huge infrastructure, if I have my huge buying power, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to ratchet my suppliers, my vendors. I'm going to get the best deals to be able to sell on low price so that more people buy from me. But then that means those smaller brands, that decision to buy has just become even harder to get someone over the hump. So it's like, and they're not going to be big enough to get these crazy deals from manufacturers. They're not going to be big enough to get crazy deals from service providers or whatever. So it's like, I think you're going to see some real carnage coming like, just in the same way they say, like the income disparity is kind of going like, high class, like, oh, sorry, like, low income, sort of high income, and the middle class is kind of getting eroded. I think the same thing is going to happen with retailers. Like, have you ever seen the movie Judge Dredd? Oh, no, not
Yes.
Judge Dredd. Demolition Man. Sorry, Demolition Man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Taco Bell's the best restaurant. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was also the only restaurant. It was the only one that could survive. And I think so it's going to work like inverse, right? Like, it's the people that have the most capability are the ones that make the most money, like individuals. But the businesses that are going to prosper the most are going to be the ones that can just completely like just crush. So like, like the Walmarts, like the Amazons, like these people that just can afford to do stuff that, and they can do it for a long time.
Yeah, I was going to say is, I think these companies or these Instagram posts and Facebook posts and whatever else about, these drop shipping and these kind of niche little people are going to struggle the most, because they can't circumvent or understand how the tariffs will work. And a lot of the products that they're getting will probably be tariff hit, and they're going to see a slump on their revenue. So they're raking in probably a good amount of money every month, and all of a sudden it's going to be half, or 3/4 gone. because these tariffs are going to come in, and they're not going to realize it until after the fact, because that's how it typically works. It's going to be like, oh, the product's here. All of a sudden, you're not paying, 10 grand for all the product that you did every month. All of a sudden, it's going to be 15 grand.
Yeah.
And because it hit the port, and that's when the tariff comes in. It doesn't come in when you buy it. It comes in when you hit that trade port, and then you have to pay that tariff on that aspect of it. And I've already seen a lot of custom houses saying, hey, we're not going to process your customs unless we get prepayment ahead of time because of tariffs come in, because we don't know what they're going to be. So they're getting prepped for it. I think it's a whole system aspect of it. On that point, though, I'll let you, as always, I will let you, as I say, have the last words, because we're on time, or a couple of minutes over. What should we look out for the week, John? What is the number one thing that we should be doing?
So I know it's redundant. I really do think paying attention to what is going to happen with tariffs, and not convincing yourself that's not going to happen. I'm more convinced than after all this research I did, and the reality is it's not really about tariffs on the product. It goes a lot deeper when it comes to the relationship between the US and China, and debt, and all kinds of other types of things that legitimately would have some serious impact if it went way out of balance. People don't probably realize. So this jockeying around tariffs and stuff like that is just more about concessions on much bigger issues. So I just say, like, they're 100% coming, and that focus for everybody in terms of, like, how is my business going to change? What are the strategies I'm going to put in place? Do I have the right type of people? Do I have the right type of information to be able to be navigating all of these things? Because I really do believe now that nuance is going to become a very important part of your business, and being able to really split hairs.
Perfect. On that note, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.